Hey everyone, it's Saoirse, and I am really excited about today's book. It's one of my all-time favorite books. It is A Walk in the Woods, Rediscovering America on the Appalachian Trail by Bill Bryson. This was published in 1998, and I have talked about quite a few Bryson books on this channel. And the only reason that I haven't talked about this one yet is because I read it so long ago that I didn't remember enough to make a video about it, but I just reread it. And I think, I was trying to think of when was the first time that I read this book. I want to guess somewhere around middle school. And then again, I think the year before I thru-hiked the Appalachian Trail. So if you don't know me and any of my backstory, when I was a very young child, I became really obsessed with hiking the AT. And I read a book called Halfway to the Sky about it. It was a book for kids. And I would hike every summer in North Carolina with family. And when I found out there's a trail 2,000 miles through the woods that you can just hike for 5 to 7 months, I fell in love with the idea, and it became the biggest dream that I've ever had. It was not just, like an idea. It wasn't just oh, I think I want to do that. It was an overwhelming, overpowering need to do it, and it's what I talked about my whole adolescence. And I finally did it when I was 24. But yeah, it was this thing that had such a strong grip on me that I knew I would never really be able to truly rest or feel, I don't know, like I'd completed anything worthwhile if I didn't do this. It was the one thing. I don't even since then I haven't come up with another thing that I have to do. It was a need, not a want. So I would read anything I could find about it, and this book is so entertaining, so funny, and so informative that it doesn't matter that it's 25 years old. So some of the information might be not up to date by 2023 standards. There's a lot of stats in here, but it is so well researched and written with that classic Bill Bryson wit and humor that I just can't get enough of. And I'm really sad I found out that he's retired now. So we're not going to see any more books from him, and that's, like, good for him, but I'm so bummed because he is one of my all-time favorite writers. Yeah, so I could just talk forever, and I probably will. This will be a long video, so you'll just have to settle in. Okay, so where do I even begin with this? Even with, his wonderful writing, when I read this book, couldn't conceptualize how difficult the AT actually is. So when I actually went out and thru-hiked it, I was quite shocked to find that it is not a walk in the woods. I love that title because it makes it sound so quaint. The AT is extremely difficult, and I know people that have done the Triple Crown, which is the Pacific Crest Trail, the Continental Divide Trail, and the Appalachian Trail, and a lot of them say that the AT is the hardest because of the terrain and the elevation gain and loss that is just constant. I mean, it's like roller coasters. There's a section of the AT that is called the roller coaster, and it's just steep climbs and roots and rocks, and it is not a woodland path. Yeah, and I knew going into it, I knew very little. I was like totally inexperienced in backpacking. I'd only day hiked. I wanted it that way. I wanted to not know anything. So even though I'd read this book and others, I didn't fully understand what I was getting myself into, let's just put it that way. And I love reading about his experience and how he really didn't understand what he was getting himself into, and just the image of him and his friend Stephen Katz hiking this trail with their ridiculously heavy gear, not hating on people who aren't ultralighters. Not everybody's into that. I personally cannot imagine carrying more weight than I do. My pack is like 25 pounds max with like a week of food and full water and all that. My base weight is like 10 pounds because I just can't handle it. I can't handle it. I realize that the weight that I carry directly impacts my mental health. Like as soon as my pack's a little bit lighter, I'm like, oh, I feel kind of happy. What's this? Anyway, let's dive into it because I will just talk backpacking all day. And I'm wearing the shirt that I got when I was a very young child, and this bracelet too. I think I got these at like some sort of gift shop near Springer Mountain. Also, as a teenager, I named my cats Springer and Katahdin. When I say it was an obsession, I'm not exaggerating. So I just was in North Carolina last week, and that's where I read most of this, and it was just the perfect setting. I even took the book onto the Appalachian Trail because it was about 40 minutes from where I was staying. And to take this book onto the AT and even read a chapter while I was out there, oh, transcendent. It was so great. All right, I'm going to read you a million quotes. Running more than 2,100 miles along America's eastern seaboard through the serene and beckoning Appalachian Mountains, the AT is the granddaddy of long hikes. From Georgia to Maine, it wanders across 14 states, through plump, comely hills whose very names, Blue Ridge, Smokies, Cumberlands, Green Mountains, White Mountains, seem an invitation to amble. Who could say the words, Great Smoky Mountains or Shenandoah Valley, and not feel an urge, as the naturalist John Muir once put it, to throw a loaf of bread and a pound of tea in an old sack and jump over the back fence? I love that quote, jump over the back fence. Because it really is so tempting all the time. I just want to go. And it calms me a lot, like when I'm having anxiety or I'm generally depressed, it helps me to remember that the trail is out there, it's always out there, and yeah, it's there when I need it, when I need to go back to it. So hiking on it last week was really, really special. I had a beautiful hike where I picked blueberries in the Roan Highlands, and I didn't even know that they grew there because I'd never been to that area during blueberry season. And just today, I baked a pie with the blueberries and also with apples that I picked at an orchard in North Carolina. I baked a pie, and today a hurricane is coming through here in Florida, so it's a good day to film a video and bake a pie and just chill. If you hear cat sounds, like screaming cat sounds, my mom brought her cats over here because she had to evacuate. So I have 5 cats here, and they've not been integrated, so 3 of them are in another room and they're all screaming at each other. So bear with me if you hear some of that. Okay. So, yeah, a quote like that about putting a loaf of bread and a pound of tea in a sack and jumping over the back fence makes the AT sound like a very quaint woodland walk, and in actuality you would not be wise to carry a loaf of bread and a pound of tea. And I can say that as somebody who did carry a loaf of bread for a little bit on the AT. Around Pennsylvania, I got into this zone where I was very bored with the food that I was eating, because basically I would eat like 5 to 7 granola bar type things a day and then some sort of dehydrated dinner. And I just couldn't take it anymore, so I started carrying a loaf of sliced bread at the top of my pack, trying not to smash it, and then I would get those little, the little tiny jellies that you get at like restaurants, and the to-go portions of peanut butter, and I had a little plastic knife, and I would make myself PB&J sandwiches. It's not really a sustainable practice for long-term backpacking, but it was fun for a bit. A lot of cat sounds. So at the beginning of the book, he talks a lot about the dangerous things that can happen, and my God, I don't know how I did the trail after reading some of this. Literally unimaginable things could happen to you out there. I heard of a man who had stepped from his tent for a midnight pee and was swooped upon by a short-sighted hoot owl. The last he saw of his scalp, it was dangling from talons prettily silhouetted against a harvest moon. And of a young woman who was woken by a tickle across her belly and peered into her sleeping bag to find a copperhead bunking down in the warmth between her legs. I heard 4 separate stories, always related with a chuckle, of campers and bears sharing tents for a few confused and lively moments. Stories of people abruptly vaporized, to weren't nothing left of him but a scorch mark, by body-sized bolts of lightning when caught in sudden storms on high ridgelines, of tents crushed beneath falling trees or eased off precipices on ball bearings of beaded rain and sent paragliding onto distant valley floors, or swept away by the watery wall of a flash flood, of hikers beyond counting whose last experience was of trembling earth and the befuddled thought, now what the... So it's true, all these things can happen. I got stuck in a few lightning storms. I remember one where I was in a forested area and then the trail went over an open field and then back into the forest. And I'm looking out like, oh, psst, psst. Like, do I just dart across this field? When is a good time to dart across this field? And it's so wild being in the woods during a thunderstorm because there's just nowhere that feels safe. You can't go inside. You just can't go inside. So you have to choose, like, which dangerous path do you want to take? I remember rainstorms that were so heavy that the trail just immediately flooded and became a river. And when I was in Maine last month hiking the 100-mile wilderness on the AT, I met a thru-hiker who said that he'd been just like a week or so before stuck in a flash flood in southern Maine. And the way he described it, I don't know what I would have done if I'd been in this. He said that the air was so full of water, it was hard to breathe. And you know that kind of rain, right? When it's so heavy, you're trying to just find air and it's just all water. And the trail rose like to his knees. That, I can't imagine getting caught in that in the best area of the trail, but in southern Maine, that's like the hardest portion of the trail. Terrifying. I'm lucky that, like, the rattlesnakes I saw, I never had a dangerous encounter with them, but they were there. Didn't have any dangerous owl encounters, and I only saw one bear, and it did not care. It did not care about mauling me or anything. It was just trying to get away. There's some bear things we're going to read in here that are hilarious. So at the beginning, he goes to get all of his gear, and this is just delightful. Because he's talking to a guy who's like a total gearhead, and I know these people, and like, I am kind of these people, but I don't know enough to be like this guy. I'm only slightly obnoxious about gear. He says, I have never been so simultaneously impressed and bewildered. We spent a whole afternoon going through his stock. He would say things to me like, now this has a 70 denier high density abrasion resistant fly with a ripstop weave. On the other hand, and I'll be frank with you here, and he would lean to me and reduce his voice to a low, candid tone as if disclosing that it had once been arrested in a public toilet with a sailor. The seams are lap-felled rather than bias-taped, and the vestibule is a little cramped. I think because I mentioned that I'd done a bit of hiking in England, he assumed some measure of competence on my part. I didn't wish to alarm or disappoint him, so when he asked me questions like, what's your view on carbon fiber stays? I would shake my head with a rueful chuckle in recognition of the famous variability of views on this perennially thorny issue and say, you know, Dave, I've never been able to make up my mind on that one. What do you think? That just made me laugh so much. Because people they get so wild about gear, and I love it. Like even when you're out on the trail and you've already gotten your gear and you're just sitting around in a shelter talking about your gear, it never gets old. At least for me. I mean, some people get sick of it. Like, there's a scene where he's very clearly tired of listening to people talk about their gear. But I think it's so interesting because everyone, like, it's amazing because you would think we would all just, if there was the right tent and the right sleeping bag and the right, like, if there was just one, yes, this is the one everyone should have, you know, we'd all have the same stuff, but we don't. And these companies are always trying to make their things lighter and more water resistant. And I guess this could be said for any product, cars, whatever. It amazes me that there's not just like one simple answer. Now, there are a lot of brands on the trail that are really popular with thru-hikers, for sure. Like Z-Packs, that's the pack and the tent that I use. And they're like super ultralight stuff. So you see a lot more of that than like the kind of heavier tents that you would use when you're car camping. But it's interesting reading this, being from the 90s, how different the gear was. You know, ultralight wasn't, these like fabrics that we have now weren't invented yet. So everything was just so much heavier. Okay, so he gets this book when he's at that store called Bear Attacks, Their Causes and Avoidance. And just, like, picturing him reading this book, it's so funny. So let us imagine that a bear does go for us out in the wilds. What are we to do? Interestingly, the advised stratagems are exactly opposite for grizzly and black bear. With a grizzly, you should make for a tall tree since grizzlies aren't much for climbing. If a tree is not available, then you should back off slowly, avoiding direct eye contact. All the books tell you that if the grizzly comes for you, on no account should you run. This is the sort of advice you get from someone who is sitting at a keyboard when he gives it. Take it from me. If you are in an open space with no weapons and a grizzly comes for you, run. You may as well. If nothing else, it will give you something to do with the last 7 seconds of your life. However, when the grizzly overtakes you, as it most assuredly will, you should fall to the ground and play dead. A grizzly may chew on a limp form for a minute or two, but generally will lose interest and shuffle off. With black bears, however, playing dead is futile because since they will continue chewing on you until you are considerably past caring. It is also foolish to climb a tree because black bears are adroit climbers, and as Herrero dryly notes, you will simply end up fighting the bear in a tree. I love it. Like, all the advice is totally contradictory. You should make noise, you shouldn't make noise. I'm glad that I never had to have a serious run-in with a bear. The one that I saw looked to be like an adolescent and was just, we locked eyes and then he was like, oh, never mind, and ran off. And the trail actually like looped around. So I ended up coming upon him again and he was like, come on, I thought I got away from you. Okay. This part made me laugh so hard. He's talking about multiple bears in this story that he read, multiple bears coming into a camp. And he said, it was not the size or demeanor of the bears that troubled me. They looked almost comically unaggressive, like 4 guys who had gotten a frisbee caught up a tree, but their numbers. Up to that moment, it had not occurred to me that bears might prowl in parties. What on earth would I do if 4 bears came into my camp? Why, I would die, of course. Literally shit myself lifeless. I would blow my sphincter out of my backside like one of those unrolling paper streamers you get at children's parties. I dare say it would even give a merry toot, and bleed to a messy death in my sleeping bag. I love that paragraph. Why, I would die, of course. Yeah, you just don't want to think about multiple bears coming into your camp. I'm glad I never had that thought, because my God. I mean, there were nights when it was hard to sleep, and anytime that I'm backpacking now, no matter the situation, It usually takes me days to be able to start sleeping well. If I'm on a shorter trip, sometimes I just don't sleep at all, and it's not good. I found out on this trip to Maine recently that I do really well with earplugs. Never had those on my thru hike, never thought about it. My God, what a difference it makes. I like to hear the night sounds, you know, but they do keep me awake. And especially if you're camped around other hikers, if you're camped near a shelter, people are snoring and loud and talking, and the earplugs help so much. I slept like a baby the first time I used them. So, you know, it only took me 6 months of a thru hike and then more backpacking trips to learn that. So he recruits his friend Stephen Katz to hike with him, and they haven't really talked in a long time. They went backpacking as young, I think, teenagers together, and didn't get along very well on that trip. So, like, we knew shenanigans were gonna ensue if he brought him with him. And he says my last words to him were, "So how are you with bears?" Hey, they haven't got me yet. That's the spirit, I thought. Good old cats. Good old anyone with a pulse and willingness to go walking with me. I just love that line. Good old anyone with a pulse. Like, he just wanted somebody to go with him. Oh yeah. And his wife, Bryson's wife, is saying, you have nothing in common with cats. He says, we have everything in common. We're 44 years old. We'll talk about hemorrhoids and lower back pain and how we can't remember where we put anything. And the next night I'll say, hey, did I tell you about my back problems? And he'll say, no, I don't think so. And we'll do it all over again. It'll be great. It'll be hell. Yeah, I know, I said. I think that's so funny. And also, I did not realize how young he was when he did this. You know, when I first read it, I was probably thinking, sure, 44 is old. Now that doesn't sound old to me at all. That sounds quite young. So, you know, I always pictured him in this book as being a much older man. But that's still quite a young adult, in my opinion, 44. A lot of cat activity going on. Oh man, this is going to be such a long video. Ah! That's okay. I always wonder if anybody even watches all of them. So he gives a lot of history of the trail in this book, and I really like this. I think it's fun. He talks about Benton McKay and Myron Avery. Myron Avery as the people who came up with the trail. It says in 1921, Benton McKay unveiled an ambitious plan for a long-distance hiking trail, and the one who really made things happen was Myron Avery, and they ended up not getting along very well. As one contemporary put it, Avery left two trails from Maine to Georgia. One was of hurt feelings and bruised egos, the other was the AT. He had no patience with McKay and his quasi-mystical epigrams, and the two never got along. Ended up in 1935. They had an acrimonious falling out over the development of the trail through Shenandoah National Park. Avery was willing to accommodate the building of a scenic highway through the mountains. McKay thought it a betrayal of founding principles, and they never spoke again. So McKay seems very much like the dreamer, and Avery's the doer. And I think you kind of need both of those to make something like this happen. So I'm glad that we got the correct recipe to make the trail exist. All 2,100 miles of the trail, as well as side trails, footbridges, signs, blazes, and shelters, are maintained by volunteers. Indeed, the AT is said to be the largest volunteer-run undertaking on the planet. It remains gloriously free of commercialism. I love that. Because people who love the AT really love the AT and want to see it continue to exist, because can you believe this? This is free and it exists and it's so wonderful. Now, this part he talks about how heavy his pack is, and how mileage just becomes so much more when you're carrying this much weight. He talks about, like, imagine that you're at a zoo and a small child won't walk, so you have to pick him up and put him on your back. And he says, now imagine 2 little Jimmies in a pack on your back, or better still, something inert but weighty, something that doesn't want to be lifted, that makes it abundantly clear to you as soon as you pick it up that what it wants is to sit heavily on the ground. Say a bag of cement or a box of medical textbooks. In any case, 40 pounds of profound heaviness. Imagine the jerk of the pack going on like the pull of a down elevator. Imagine walking with that weight for hours, for days, and not along level asphalt paths with benches and refreshment booths at thoughtful intervals, but over a rough trail full of sharp rocks and unyielding roots and staggering ascents that transfer enormous amounts of strain to your pale, shaking thighs. Now tilt your head back until your neck is taut and fix your gaze on a point 2 miles away. That's your first climb. It's 4,682 steep feet to the top, and there are lots more like it. Don't tell me that 7 miles is not far. Oh, and here's the other thing. You don't have to do this. You're not in the army. You can quit right now. Go home, see your family, sleep in a bed. Yeah, I love that description. Because, my God, it is so heavy. This past week when I was hiking and just wearing a day pack, it's like, it's night and day. It makes me amazed every time that I was able to wear so much weight while hiking. I mean, it really just, I can't even comprehend it. I've done it so much. I've done the AT, I've done the Long Trail, I've done the West Highland Way, and other short hikes, and I don't know how I've managed carrying that much weight, when normally on a day hike I'm carrying a bottle of water and a couple snacks. You know, it's like, I feel very proud of myself when I think about it. It's just, like I said, it directly affects your mental health, though. On this hike in the 100-mile wilderness, I started out with way too much food, and I was like begging people to take my food by the second day. I just knew I had too much, and yeah, it was like I would just force feed myself basically, because I wanted this weight to be anywhere except on my back. Yeah, it was not good. Here's a little bit about how tough the AT is, or how forbidding, if that's the right word. But even men far tougher and more attuned to wilderness than Thoreau were sobered by its strange and palpable menace. Daniel Boone, who not only wrestled bears but tried to date their sisters, described corners of the southern Appalachians as so wild and horrid that it is impossible to behold them without terror. When Daniel Boone is uneasy, you know it's time to watch your step. Like I said, even reading all of this, I still did not at all realize how hard it was going to be. And I just think from the pages of a book, you'll never be able to fully conceptualize, even with a fantastic writer like Bryson. I think about books like Into Thin Air, reading about Everest. You can get a feeling from it of what it must have been like, but you will never ever be able to truly feel it unless you've experienced it. Yeah, it's more like you can feel sympathy, like, wow, it must have been really cold on Everest. Whew, that must have sucked. The difference between that and actually living through that storm, and how horrific it was, that's a big difference. So, like, reading this book in your cozy house, where you have access to running water, it's just very different. I just like this description. They started out in March, which I did as well, but they got a very serious winter storm that came in, and it was way, way colder when they started. There's a strange frozen violence in a forest out of season. Every glade and dale seemed to have just completed some massive cataclysm. Downed trees lay across the path every 50 or 60 yards, often with great bomb craters of dirt around their splayed roots. Dozens more lay rotting on the slopes, and every third or fourth tree, it seemed, was leaning steeply on a neighbor. It was as if the trees couldn't wait to fall over, as if their sole purpose in the universal scheme of things was to grow big enough to topple with a really good splintering crash. I was forever coming up to trees so precariously and weightily tipped over the path that I would waver, then scoot under, fearing the crush of really unfortunate timing, and imagining cats coming along a few minutes later, regarding my wriggling legs and saying, "Shit, Bryson, what are you doing under there?" But no trees fell. Everywhere the woods were still and preternaturally quiet. I can't say that word. Except for the occasional gurgle of running water and the tiny shuffle of wind-stirred leaves along the forest floor, there was almost never a sound. That's such a spooky feeling. I love the description of the strange frozen violence of a forest out of season, because it, as somebody from Florida who grew up without seasons, especially winter, I had no reference point for what winter really looks like, and especially in a forest. And it does look violent. It looks wrong. I mean, it's beautiful in a way, but it's so bleak. It's so the opposite of a forest full of life and color, that it's really very eerie. It's pouring right now, by the way. You probably can't hear it, but it's very cozy. But I've had a headache all day, which is just bumming me out. And I also burned both of my hands. Can you see this? I burned the backs of both of my hands in turning on the oven to bake that pie that I mentioned. So, yeah. Oh, this is a great bit here, because when I was out on this recent hike, there were moments where I thought, I am so miserable. I don't ever want to do this again. I don't know why I ever do it in the first place. I actually hate it. And then, when I got home from this experience, I look back at it with starry eyes and like it was the greatest thing ever. And this is what backpacking does. You experience so much deprivation and struggle and pain. It makes all the highs very high because you are so low, like the baseline's so low, that, like when you spend hours slogging through bogs, which is what we did in Maine, then when you come upon a glorious mountain lake where you can go swimming, it is so profoundly wonderful. Just listen to this. He's talking about the first road crossing that you come to after you start on Springer Mountain. And boy, do I remember this place at Neal's Gap. Yeah. I've been living off of, like, Cliff Bars. I can't even touch Cliff Bars to this day because of this. I did not pack correctly the amount of food that I would need for that first few days. So I got to this store and it was just incredible to see food and be inside, So he gets to this place and he says, "Now it may seem to stretch credibility to suggest that things like a paved highway, the whoosh of passing cars, and a proper building could seem exciting and unfamiliar after a scant 5 days in the woods, but in fact it was so. Just passing through a door, being inside, surrounded by walls and a ceiling, was novel. And the Wallacey stuff was, well, I can't begin to describe how wonderful it was. There was a single modest-sized refrigerator filled with fresh sandwiches, soft drinks, cartons of juice, and perishables like cheese, and Katz and I stared into it for ages, dumbly captivated. I was beginning to appreciate that the central feature of life on the Appalachian Trail is deprivation, that the whole point of the experience is to remove yourself so thoroughly from the conveniences of everyday life that the most ordinary things, processed cheese, a can of pop gorgeously beaded with condensation, fill you with wonder and gratitude. It is an intoxicating experience to taste Coca-Cola as if for the first time, and to be conveyed to the very brink of orgasm by white bread makes all the different discomfort worthwhile, if you ask me. And it is so true. Every little convenience that we take for granted in daily life becomes like some magical, mystical thing on the trail, because when you're just walking for days and it's just trees, it's just you and trees, and then you come to a place with a toilet and food in cold refrigerators, especially like the extremes when you're hiking in the dead of summer and it's just brutally hot, and when you fill up, you filter your water at those streams, and then the second you put it in if you use a reservoir or a bottle, it's warm. Like the water you're just always drinking warm water all day. To be able to go to a place that has a cold beverage, oh my god, I drank so many fruit smoothies on my thru hike whenever I got to like a gas station to resupply and I could get a smoothie. And then the opposite, when you're hiking and it's freezing and you can get a hot beverage or stand somewhere with heat. I love this bit about distance. It says, distance changes utterly when you take the world on foot. A mile becomes a long way, 2 miles literally considerable, 10 miles whopping, 50 miles at the very limits of conception. The world, you realize, is enormous in a way that only you and a small community of fellow hikers know. Planetary scale is your little secret. Life takes on a neat simplicity, too. Time ceases to have any meaning. When it is dark, you go to bed, and when it is light again, you get up, and everything in between is just in between. It's quite wonderful, really. You have no engagements, commitments, obligations, or duties, no special ambitions, and only the smallest, least complicated of wants. You exist in a tranquil tedium, serenely beyond the reach of exasperation, far removed from the seats of strife, as the early explorer and botanist William Bartram put it. All that is required of you is a willingness to trudge. There is no point in hurrying because you are not actually going anywhere. However far or long you plod, you are always in the same place, in the woods. It's where you were yesterday, where you will be tomorrow. The woods is one boundless singularity. Every bend in the path presents a prospect indistinguishable from every other, every glimpse into the trees the same tangled mass. For all you know, your route could describe a very large pointless circle. In a way, it would hardly matter. Ah, I love that. You really do think about distance so differently, and it's one of the strangest, most surreal experiences to go from hiking for days to hitching a ride, getting in a car and driving 20 miles, and thinking about how it took you a day and a half to do that distance before. Yeah. Okay. Let's keep moving. Sometimes I just can't read my writing. I remember reading once how some Stone Age Indians from the Brazilian rainforest with no knowledge or expectation of a world beyond the jungle were taken to Sao Paulo or Rio, and when they saw what it contained, the buildings, the cars, the passing airplanes, and how thoroughly at variance it was with their own simple lives, they wet themselves, lavishly and in unison. I believe I had some idea how they felt. It is such a strange contrast. When you're on the AT, the forest is your universe, infinite and entire. It is all you experience day after day. Eventually, it is about all you can imagine. You are aware, of course, that somewhere over the horizon there are mighty cities, busy factories, crowded freeways, but here in this part of the country where woods drape the landscape for as far as the eye can see, the forest rules. Even little towns like Franklin and Hiawassee and even Gatlinburg are just way stations scattered helpfully through the great cosmos of woods. But come off the trail, properly off, and drive somewhere as we did now, and you realize how magnificently deluded you have been. Here the mountains and woods were just backdrop, familiar, known, nearby, but no more consequential or noticed than the clouds that scudded across their ridgelines. Here the real business was up close and on top of you. Gas stations, Walmarts, Kmarts, Dunkin' Donuts, Blockbuster videos, a ceaseless unfolding pageant of commercial hideousness. Even Katz was unnerved by it. "Geez, it's ugly," he breathed in wonder, as if he had never witnessed such a thing before. I looked past him, along the line of his shoulder, to a vast shopping mall with a prairie-sized parking lot, and agreed. It was horrible. And then, lavishly and in unison, we wet ourselves. Oh, God. It is truly shocking and horrible when you come off the trail and you're used to just being surrounded by serene natural beauty, the way that the world should be, and then seeing this awful capitalist mess. Yeah, and he just really hits the nail on the head in this book with his descriptions of that. So yeah, there comes a point in Gatlinburg when they realize they have taken forever to hike not very much of the trail, and they give up on the idea of hiking the entire AT and decide to go ahead to Virginia. And then Cats can't join him for the whole summer, so it kind of breaks off into part 2, and Bill Bryson is trying to do it by like driving himself to sections of the trail, and that's just a disaster. I wish that they'd been able to do the whole thing together. It would have been so funny. Where am I? What am I doing here? There's this one quote from John Bartram. It says, "I can't find one friend that will bear the fatigue to accompany me in my peregrinations." He's so upset that nobody wants to hike with him, and I just love that sentence. That's such a fun way to say no one will hike with me. Because even back then it seems like it was just not everyone's thing. And I just really can't understand people who don't love the outdoors. It's like, but that's what we are. We're animals. That's where we came from. Yeah, it's nice to be in an air-conditioned place, but like, don't you feel more alive on a hill somewhere? I don't know. I guess not everybody does. Each time you leave the cosseted and hygienic world of towns and take yourself into the hills, you go through a series of staged transformations, a kind of gentle descent into squalor, and each time it is as if you have never done it before. At the end of the first day you feel mildly, self-consciously grubby, by the second day disgustingly so, by the third you are beyond caring, by the fourth you have forgotten what it is like not to be like this. Hunger, too, follows a defined pattern. On the first night you're starving for your noodles, on the second night you're starving but wish it wasn't noodles, on the third night you don't want the noodles but know you had better eat something, by the fourth you have no appetite at all but just eat because that is what you do at this time of day. I can't explain it, but it is strangely agreeable. Yeah, definitely, that. Especially with the food. I was amazed by on this trip that how I was force feeding myself. I didn't want any of the food that I had, and I was really stressed about this because during my through hike, I used food motivation the whole time, and I'm a very food motivated person in regular life. So to not have that as my motivation anymore was really tough, because normally I'd be like, okay, I'm gonna get through this difficult day of hiking because I've got that dehydrated mac and cheese tonight, and that's what I'm working for right now. But on this last hike, I was just so full all the time. I never ever felt the feeling of hunger because I kept having to get rid of all this food by putting it into my stomach. So yeah, I missed having that motivation. And that's so true. Just, you don't even want the noodles, but it's that time of day. So there were so many nights where I would just, light the stove and boil the water and make the food and just, I'm not even excited about it, which is so not like me. We had been a week on the trail and we were going to town the next day. That was self-evident. We would hike 8 miles, get a room, have a shower, phone home, do laundry, eat dinner, buy groceries, watch TV, sleep in a bed, eat breakfast, return to the trail. All that was known and obvious. Everything we did was known and obvious. It was wonderful, really. Perfect little way to say that. Everything being known and obvious is one of the best parts of hiking to me, because there's no anxiety. Most of my anxiety comes from, what am I supposed to be doing? What should I do with my life? What should I do with this day that I have all this time free? With hiking, it's all figured out for you. You just walk, you know, you climb this mountain. If you're backpacking, you get into town somewhere, you resupply, you sleep, you charge up your stuff, and you go back out and you do it again. And it is just that. You know, for 6 months, I just had one thing that I had to do, which was get to Katahdin. And I felt anxiety on the through hike because I knew every day one injury could take me out and the whole thing would be over. But on trips with less stakes involved, it is like there's just no anxiety involved because you're just doing something so simple. You don't have to think about it. Of course, you're still, if you're like me, dealing with physical pain, but, you know, a certain level of that I can manage, and it's quite different from having the normal level of anxiety that I deal with. Oh, there's a super funny part where they're in town and he's trying to go get bug spray, and he's got to go get to a Kmart. And this guy tells him, it's like, oh, it's like maybe a mile and a half away. And he's saying, yeah, I'll walk there. And the guy is just so shocked. And he's talking about how nice it is to walk without a pack on. And how you spring, you saunter, you amble, or at least you do for 4 blocks. Then you come to a mad junction at Burger King and discover that the new 6-lane road to Kmart is long, straight, very busy, and entirely without facilities for pedestrians. No sidewalks, no pedestrian crossings, no central refuges, no buttons to push for a walk signal at lively intersections. I walked through gas station and motel forecourts and across restaurant parking lots, clambered over concrete barriers, crossed lawns, and pushed through neglected ranks of privet or honeysuckle at property boundaries, at bridges over creeks and culverts, and goodness me, how developers love a culvert. I had no choice but to walk on the road, pressed against the dusty railings and causing less attentive cars to swerve to avoid me. 4 times I was honked at for having the temerity to proceed through town without benefit of metal. One bridge was so patently dangerous that I hesitated at it. The creek it crossed was only a reedy trickle narrow enough to step across, so I decided to go that way. I slid and scampered down the bank, found myself in a hidden zone of sucking gray mud, pitched over twice, hauled myself up the other side, pitched over again, and emerged at length streaked and speckled with mud and extravagantly decorated with burrs. When I finally reached the Kmart Plaza, I discovered that I was on the wrong side of the road, and had to dash through 6 lanes of hostile traffic. By the time I crossed the parking lot and stepped into the air-conditioned, Muzak-happy world of Kmart, I was as grubby as if I had been on the trail and trembling all over. The Kmart, it turned out, didn't stock insect repellent. It's funny, but it does make me so sad that America is just not built for walking. It's not built for pedestrians. It is built for cars. And that is something that, like, in my daily life bums me out. Because I love walking. And I wish that the town I live in was a town where you could just amble down the road and, you know, be a pedestrian. But it is just asphalt and dangerous roads. It's, yeah, really makes me sad. But I thought that was the perfect paragraph to describe what it's like. You know, somebody is so shocked that a person would be walking to do an errand, and then this is how freaking difficult it is to walk at all here. Like, no wonder that no one in this country walks. And here's another bit about people who cannot comprehend backpacking. This was really funny. In the Shenandoahs, the trail goes by Skyline Drive. It like follows along Skyline Drive, so there's all these waypoints where there's basically restaurants and shops and people car camp and day hike and that sort of thing. And these people can't believe they've walked 16 miles that day. And I love the way he puts this. Bernice arrived, and he explained to her that we were using our legs to proceed across the landscape. Ain't that something? They got all their food and everything in those packs. Is that a fact? Bernice said with admiration and interest. So you're like walking everywhere? We nodded. You walked here, all the way up here? We walk everywhere, said Katz solemnly. You never walked all the way up here. Well, we did, said Katz, for whom this was becoming one of the proudest moments of his life. It's so fun. Like, there are certain sections of the trail where you do meet a lot of, you know, tourists, people who are not into hiking, and they either don't realize that they've stumbled upon the AT, or they just can't comprehend that people are doing this. And it's very fun to talk to them. And the best thing is when you feel like you've walked away from one of those conversations having inspired somebody to try hiking. I love this bit about how old the Appalachians are. That the Appalachian Mountains present so much more modest an aspect today is because they have had so much time in which to wear away. The Appalachians are immensely old, older than the oceans and continents, at least in their present configurations, far, far older than most other mountain chains, older indeed than almost all other landscape features on Earth. When simple plants colonized the land and the first creatures crawled gasping from the sea, the Appalachians were there to greet them. Oh, I just love these mountains. I love these mountains. I love these mountains. I don't care what anybody says about it being a green tunnel and not enough open vistas and, you know, all the mountains are under 7,000 feet, so they're not impressive enough. I would take the Appalachian Mountains over any other mountain range any day. They're so cool. Like, they're ancient. And they're everywhere. A corner of Staten Island is geologically part of Europe. The seaboard from New England up to Canada appears to have originated in Morocco. Parts of Greenland, Ireland, Scotland, and Scandinavia have the same rocks as the eastern United States, are in effect ruptured outposts of the Appalachians. There are even suggestions that mountains as far south as the Shackleton Range in Antarctica may be fragments of the Appalachian family. So there's actually a thing called the International Appalachian Trail now, and that keeps going. Once you get to Katahdin, it extends into Canada, and then you gotta cross the ocean. I think it goes through Iceland, into Scotland. Basically follows what we know is geologically part of the Appalachian Range, even though it's not all connected anymore. It's shifted apart and gone across the ocean. I just think that's so cool. And it's so freaky that the mountains are shrinking. It says most mountains have several streams and moreover are exposed to a vast range of other reductive factors, from the infinitesimal acidic secretions of lichen, tiny but relentless, to the grinding scrape of ice sheets, so most mountains vanish very much more quickly, in a couple of 100 million years, say. Right now the Appalachians are shrinking on average by 0.03 millimeters per year. They have gone through this cycle at least twice, possibly more, rising to awesome heights, eroding away to nothingness, rising again, each time recycling their component materials in a dazzlingly confused and complex geology. Isn't that absolutely wild? I didn't know that mountains do that. It kind of makes me sad. Like, I want the Appalachians in the form that they are to just stay that way forever. I guess they will for my lifetime, pretty much. This was interesting. In America, alas, beauty has become something you drive to, and nature an either-or proposition. Either you ruthlessly subjugate it, as at Talk's Dam and a million other places, or you deify it, treat it as something holy and remote, a thing apart, as along the Appalachian Trail. Seldom would it occur to anyone on either side that people and nature could coexist to their mutual benefit. And he's kind of comparing it to the way that hiking is in Europe. And it is something that I miss about living in the UK. I love our wilderness. I think the American wilderness is just ridiculously beautiful and should be venerated and treated as, you know, like he says, deified, and it's sacred. At the same time, I miss nature being part of civilization. So in America, it's like, you're in the great wilderness, or you are very much in civilization. And I liked how in the UK it was like they were kind of coexisting more, so the nature was very tame, but the towns weren't so they weren't as like asphalt and strip malls, you know? It was like in Edinburgh, where I lived in Scotland, felt like it was kind of a city that had been built in a park, you know, just nestled in the hills, and there were just walking paths everywhere. Like, where are you gonna find a walking path in most American towns? Or maybe that's like largely a Florida problem. There's just not that many places to go for a good nature walk, at least not where I live. And it's too hot, but anyway, that's a different issue. I'm literally sitting here in a hurricane right now. I have feelings. He meets this guy named Chicken John, who's always losing the trail. It says, goodness knows how anyone could manage to lose the Appalachian Trail. It is the most clearly defined, well-blazed footpath imaginable. Usually it is the only thing in the woods that isn't woods. If you can distinguish between trees and a long open corridor through the trees, you will have no trouble finding your way along the AT. And I have to say, like, well, that is funny. It's totally possible to get lost on the AT. There have been times where I went, I'm not kidding, like a couple yards off the trail to go pee, and I turned around, like I would look up and look around and go, oh my god, I don't know where anything is now. If you just get out of sight of that little strip of path, all the trees just start looking the same, and it is scary. People have died that way, so yeah, be careful, even though it is extremely well marked. I did get lost a few times. Oh, there's this bit about bugs. My god, bugs. It was only 9 miles over easy terrain, but the black fly made it a torment. I have never seen a scientific name for these tiny, vile, winged specks, so I don't know what they are other than a hovering mass that goes with you wherever you are and are forever in your ears and mouth and nostrils. Human sweat transports them to a realm of orgasmic ecstasy, and insect repellent only seems to excite them further. They are particularly relentless when you stop to rest or take a drink, so relentless that eventually you don't stop to rest and you drink while moving, and then spit out a tongueful of them. It is kind of living hell. So it was with some relief that I stepped from their woodland realm in early afternoon and strolled into the sunny, dozing straggle that was the little community of Cheshire. Black flies, yeah, absolute worst. Hands down. Mosquitoes are bad, but the black flies that I experienced on the long trail in Vermont, it's just like he said, you can never stop. I got to the point where I had to hike so fast to create enough of a wind to keep these things off of me. I had to wear a bug net where I could barely see anything. It was out of the question to sit down and have a snack. Out of the question. And their bites hurt. So they're just constantly nipping you all over your body, and just, you're living in a cloud of them. So those are terrible. But then last month in Maine, my god, the mosquitoes were out of control. And then I later found out the mosquito populations were up like 30% because of all the flooding. So I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense why they were incredibly brutal. But yeah, my friend Margot, who I hiked with, she had a full bug net on the face and bug pants. Which was very cool and useful, and I would have liked to have like a bug shirt. I mean, they were just, why do bugs have to ruin hiking season? You know, everybody's like, oh, it's finally summer, it's hiking season, and then all the bugs are out. And it's especially bad in Scotland, where there's such a small window where the weather is comfortable to hike in, and that's when the midges are out, and they're kind of like black flies, but I think not quite as bad. At least in my experience. I love this bit here. He says, this is from the Thru-Hiker's handbook. When the northbound hiker leaves Vermont, he has completed 80% of the miles, but just 50% of the effort. The New Hampshire portion alone, running 162 miles through the White Mountains, has 35 peaks higher than 3,000 feet. New Hampshire is hard. And I really thought of that quote when I got to the New Hampshire border. I was like, 80% of the miles, but 50% of the effort. How can I do 50% more effort just in the last 2 states? Oh my god. But it is 100% true. My camera is dying and I'm running out of space on my card, and oh my god, this is a much longer video than I planned. So he writes about getting to Mount Washington in New Hampshire, which is the second highest mountain on the trail. And this is a mountain where you can actually drive up to the top, and there's a whole complex of stuff up there. So he sees all these people. They were everywhere, basking in the sunshine, draped over the railings on the viewing terraces, wandering between various shops and food places. I felt for some minutes like a visitor from another planet. I loved it. It was a nightmare, of course, and a desecration of the highest mountain in the Northeast, but I was delighted it existed in one place. It made the rest of the trail seem perfect. That was a nice way to look at it, because it is just absolutely, like he said, a desecration, and I'm glad that it makes a place like that accessible to people who can't hike, but damn, it is pretty sad when you get up there and you see it, and you look out at just the vast wilderness, and then, you know, you can turn around and, like, get a hot dog. It's just, it makes no sense, but it does make the rest of the trail seem that much more perfect. Hunters will tell you that a moose is a wily and ferocious forest creature. Nonsense. A moose is a cow drawn by a 3-year-old. That's all there is to it. Without doubt, the moose is the most improbable, endearingly hopeless creature ever to live in the wilds. Every bit of it, its spindly legs, its chronically puzzled expression, its comical oven-mitt antlers. Looks like some droll evolutionary joke. It is wondrously ungainly. It runs as if its legs have never been introduced to each other. Above all, what distinguishes the moose is its almost boundless lack of intelligence. If you are driving down a highway and a moose steps from the woods ahead of you, he will stare at you for a long minute. Moose are notoriously short-sighted. Then abruptly try to run away from you, legs flailing in 8 directions at once. Never mind that there are several thousand square miles of forest on either side of the highway. The moose does not think of this. Clueless as to what exactly is going on, he runs halfway to New Brunswick before his peculiar gait inadvertently steers him back into the woods, where he immediately stops and takes on a startled expression that says, "Hey, woods! Now how the heck did I get here?" Moose are so monumentally muddle-headed, in fact, that when they hear a car or truck approaching, they will often bolt out of the woods and onto the highway in the curious hope that this will bring them to safety. Oh, moose. So, it hurts my heart greatly. I have never seen a moose while hiking. Why? I dream of them. I want to see them so bad. And when I did the long trail, the other hikers and I would call it the moose poop highway, because it was just constant moose poop everywhere. I mean, they're clearly using the trail as well, and I saw their poop every single moment of every day. Never saw a moose, and I'm just dying to. Anyway, yeah, sad stuff. So, Katz eventually comes to join Bill Bryson for the 100-mile wilderness, and there are a lot of water crossings in the 100-mile, and this was a really fun part for me to read, having just done this section last month. And it was particularly wet when I did it this time. During my thru-hike, it wasn't. It was normal conditions. It was September, cold, but dry. Hello. But this time, Maine had been experiencing a lot of torrential rain and flooding, so all the water crossings that you have to do, the actual fording of rivers, they were a lot tougher because they were higher up. There were some that were like mid to upper thigh on me, and if we had gone a week earlier, they would have been waist deep and probably impassable. So they're doing all these water crossings, and just picturing the two of them doing it is delightful. It says, he's watching cats. He tried to ease himself into the silvery current and wade the last 10 yards to shore, but was instantly whisked away like a feather. For the second time in 2 days, I sincerely thought he was drowning. He was certainly helpless, but the current carried him to a shallow bar of gleaming pebbles 20 feet farther on, where he came up sputtering on his hands and knees, struggled up onto the bank, and continued on into the woods without a backward glance, as if this were the most normal thing in the world. I love that bit because it's just this kind of put your head down and get through it acceptance that happens when you're on the AT. Because it's like complaining is only enjoyable to a certain point, and then you just go into like another place in your brain and get through it, or you just shut your brain off, really is what it feels like. So he talks about entering the 100-mile wilderness, how there's this sign that basically tells you, you're gonna die in here. Be careful. It says, the sign basically says you shouldn't proceed if you don't have at least 10 days of food and aren't feeling like the people in a Patagonia ad. And the woods, he notes that they are different, and it is so true. And the second that you get out of the 100-mile wilderness, when you reach Abel Bridge, right before Katahdin, it feels so different. It is like coming out of the spooky Snow White forest into a regular forest. And he says they were unquestionably different from woods further south, darker, more shadowy, inclining more to black than green. There were different trees, too, more conifers at low levels and many more birches. And scattered through the undergrowth were large, rounded black boulders like sleeping animals, which lent the still recesses a certain eeriness. When Walt Disney made a motion picture of Bambi, his artists based their images on the great north woods of Maine, but this was palpably not a Disney forest of roomy glades and cuddlesome creatures. This brought to mind the woods in The Wizard of Oz, where the trees have ugly faces and malign intent, and every step seems a gamble. This was a woods for looming bears, dangling snakes, wolves with laser-red eyes, strange noises, sudden terrors, a place of standing night, as Thoreau neatly and nervously put it. Yeah, the 100-mile wilderness definitely has a very different flavor than most of the trail. And that's, if you don't know, that's the longest section of wilderness, meaning there's no paved roads the whole time. There are some logging roads, but it is the hardest section of the trail to get help if you need it. This part I really felt when they decide to quit their hike when they're in the 100-mile wilderness. And and he realizes that Katz is not like obsessed with getting a soda right away. He says there is always a measure of shock when you leave the trail and find yourself parachuted into a world of comfort and choice, but it was different this time. This time it was permanent. We were hanging up our hiking boots. From now on there would always be Coke and soft beds and showers and whatever else we wanted. There was no urgency now. It was a strangely subduing notion. Yeah, and that kind of goes into post-trail depression, which is a common thing that hikers deal with and is very, very serious. And yeah, even on this 100-mile hike, when I came home, I got that immediate wave of depression. Like, oh, the soft bed is great. I was dreaming about my soft bed the entire time, but now I can have this soft bed whenever I want, and I can have it forever, and the trail is way out there, and I'm here, and I'm not on it, and it's a very weird feeling, and he describes it really well in this passage. When Kat says, "So do you feel bad about leaving the trail?" I thought for a moment, unsure. I had come to realize that I didn't have any feelings towards the AT that weren't confused and contradictory. I was weary of the trail, but still strangely in its thrall. Found the endless slog tedious but irresistible. Grew tired of the boundless woods but admired their boundlessness. Enjoyed the escape from civilization and ached for its comforts. I wanted to quit and to do this forever. Sleep in a bed and end in a tent, see what was over the next hill and never see a hill again. All of this, all at once, every moment, on the trail or off. I don't know, I said. Yes and no, I guess. Perfect. I mean, that just says it all. All my feelings are very contradictory, too. I mean, while I'm doing it, like I said, I had so many feelings of just being miserable. But then it made all the feelings that, like all the good stuff, like swimming in the lake and picking wild blueberries, all of that stuff felt like through the roof incredible because it was so different from all the discomforts that you experience yeah. I continued to hike on and off through the rest of the summer and into fall. In mid-October, at the height of the foliage season, I went for what proved to be a final walk, a return visit to Killington Peak in Vermont, on one of those glorious days when the world is full of autumn muskiness and crisp, tangy perfection, and the air so clear that you feel as if you could reach out and ping it with a finger. Even the colors were crisp, vivid blue sky, deep green fields, leaves in every sharp shade that nature can bestow. It is a truly astounding sight when every tree in a forest becomes individual. Where formerly had sprawled a seamless cloak of green, there now stood a million bright colors. I hiked with enthusiasm and vigor, buoyed by fresh air and splendor. From the roof of Killington there was a 360-degree panorama over nearly the whole of New England and on to Quebec as far as the distant bluish nubbin of Mount Royal. Almost every peak of consequence in New England, Washington, Lafayette, Greylock, Monadnock, Ascutney, Moosilauke, stood etched in fine relief and looked 10 times closer than it actually was. It was so beautiful, I cannot tell you. That this boundless vista represented but a fragment of the Appalachians' full sweep, that under my feet there lay a free and exquisitely maintained trail running for 2,200 miles through hills and woods of equal grandeur, was a thought almost too overpowering to hold. I don't recall a moment in my life when I was more acutely aware of how Providence has favored the land to which I was born. It seemed a perfect place to stop. Beautiful, beautiful description. Yeah, it's just perfect, and it's there. And then here's another bit about it being perfect. I still quite often go for walks on the trail near my home. He lives in Hanover, New Hampshire, where the trail actually goes through, especially if I am stuck on something I'm working on. Most of the time I am sunk in thought, but at some point on each walk there comes a moment when I look up and notice, with a kind of first-time astonishment, the amazing complex delicacy of the woods, the casual ease with which elemental things come together to form a composition that is, whatever the season, wherever I put my besotted gaze, perfect. Not fine, not just very fine or splendid, but perfect, unimprovable. You don't have to walk miles up mountains to achieve this, don't have to plod through blizzards, slip sputtering in mud, wade chest deep through water, hike day after day to the edge of your limits. But believe me, it helps. So, I loved rereading this. I love waiting years to reread a book so that I can forget enough of it and it's like new to me again, so I'm already sad that I'll have to wait another few years before I can read this again. I forgot to read you the back, so if you're still here, I'll read you the back. Back in America after 20 years in Britain, Bill Bryson decided to reacquaint himself with his native country by walking the 2,100-mile Appalachian Trail, which stretches from Georgia to Maine. The AT offers an astonishing landscape of silent forests and sparkling lakes, and to a writer with the comic genius of Bill Bryson, it also provides endless opportunities to witness the majestic silliness of his fellow human beings. For a start, there's the gloriously out-of-shape Stephen Katz, a buddy from Iowa, along for the walk. Despite Katz's overwhelming desire to find cozy restaurants, he and Bryson eventually settle into their stride, and while on the trail they meet a bizarre assortment of hilarious characters. But a walk in the woods is more than just a laugh-out-loud hike. Bryson's acute eye is a wise witness to this beautiful but fragile trail, and as he tells its fascinating history, he makes a moving plea for the conservation of America's last great wilderness. An adventure, a comedy, and a celebration, A Walk in the Woods is destined to become a modern classic of travel literature. And I think that's what it is. It is a modern classic of travel literature. It's the book when you think of the AT, which is funny, and a lot of thru-hikers, I think, take issue with the fact that he didn't actually complete the whole trail, but I'm a thru-hiker and I don't care. I love the book, and I think it gets a lot of people interested in the AT and interested in taking care of it and preserving it for future generations, which is very important. So, yeah, in case you couldn't tell, I highly recommend the book. Please read it. And I don't know where he lives now. I think he might have moved back to the UK. He wasn't in Hanover for all that long. And he says in the end, they didn't get to Katahdin, but he promises he'll do it someday. And I don't know if he did. I haven't done a ton of research, but if anybody knows, did he actually do Katahdin? I really hope so. I just wish, like I said, that they had done the whole thing together, because I would have loved to read every detail, because it's all familiar stuff to me. I guess it's not as interesting if you're not familiar with all the places that he talks about. But I loved being like, oh, I know that mountain, I know that shelter, I know that town. I wonder if he took cats along as a writer because he knew that he would make a very good character. That's highly likely. I would definitely do something like that. Anyway, I might have shown this before, but this is my hiker yearbook from 2018. I'm not sure if they're doing this anymore, but it's a really cool thing that this guy would put together. And you send in your photo, and then you get to be in your Thru-Hiker yearbook. And there's me right there. Where did I go? Oh. Story. And that is a picture of me in the 100-mile wilderness. And yeah, that's my trail name, Story. But it's cool because that spot right there in Maine, I just revisited last month, and I knew it as soon as I saw it. I was like, this is where I took my hiker yearbook photo. Very exciting. So that is all for now. Thanks for watching this very long video. I hope that you just chilled and had a nice time with it. If you made it all the way through, that is so very cool and sexy of you. So, if anybody ever wants to talk trail stuff, I'm here. It's what I do. I'm never going to stop talking about the trail, so get used to it. I think I've earned the right to just never shut up about it after walking 2,190.9 miles. So, that being said, get out there and go for a hike if you can. I promise you won't regret it. And until next time, my god, I'm so done with talking. I'm so done with talking. My throat hurts. I'm gonna go lie down and ride out this hurricane. Until next time, happy reading.